Chapter 2, the second year. It was a beautiful day, that 25th of August, 1886, when Manly and Laura moved to the homestead. A fine day, as fine as our wedding day just a year ago, and it's a new start just as that was. And a new home, if it is some smaller. We'll be all right now, you'll see. Everything evens up in the end. The rich man, his voice trailed silent, but Laura couldn't help finishing the Irishman saying to herself, "The rich man has had his ice in the summer, and the poor man gets his in the winter." Well, they had got theirs in that hailstorm and in the summer too. But she mustn't think about that now. The thing to do was to get things arranged for the new home and to make it cheerful for Manly. Poor Manly, he was having a hard time and doing his very best. The house wasn't so bad. The one new room was narrow, 12 feet by 16, and not very long, facing the south with a door and a window and a narrow porch, close to the west end by the old claim shanty. There was a window in the east end of the room. The looking glass was hung beside it in the south corner, and the parlor table stood under it. The head of the bed came close to the window on the other side and extended along the north wall. The kitchen stove was in the northwest corner of the room, and a kitchen cupboard stood beside it. The kitchen dining table stood against the west wall close to the south end. The carpet from the old bedroom was across the east end of the room, and the armchair and Laura's little rocking chair stood on it, close to each other between the windows. The sun came in through the east window in the mornings and shone across the room. It was all very snug and pleasant. The room that had been the claim shanty was convenient as a storage room, and the stock were comfortable in their new barn. Sheltered from the north and west by the low hill and facing the south, it would be warm in winter. The whole place was new and fresh. The wind waved the tall grass in the slough that stretched from the foot of the hill by the barn to the south and to the east line of the farm. The house was at the top of the low hill, and there would always be grassland in front of it. The plowed land lay to the north of the hill, out of sight from the house. Laura was glad of that. She loved the sweep of unbroken prairie with the wild grasses waving in the winds. To be sure, the whole place was grassland now, except for a small field. 10 acres of cultivated land were required by law before proving up on a homestead. But the grass to the north of the house was upland, blue stem, and not the tall slough grass that grew so rankly in low places. It was haying time, and every day counted in the amount of hay that could be put up before winter. Because of the hailstorm, hay would be the only crop this year. So as soon as breakfast was over on the day after the moving, Manly hitched Skip and Barnum to the moving machine and began cutting hay. Laura left her morning's work undone and went with him to see the work started, and then, because the air was so fresh and the new cut hay so clean and sweet, she wandered over the field, picking the wild sunflowers and Indian paintbrush. Presently, she went slowly back to the house and her unfinished tasks. She didn't want to stay in the house. There would be so much of that after the baby came, and she felt much better out in the fresh air. So after that, she did as little as possible in the house and instead stayed out in the hayfield with Manly. When he loaded the hay in the big hay rack to haul to the barn, Laura, already in the wagon, stepped up on each forkful as it was pitched in, and so gradually rose with the load until she was on the top, ready to ride to the barn. At the barn, she slid down the hay into Manly's arms and was safely on the ground. Manly made the stacks in the field with a bull rake. The bull rake was a long, wide plank with long wooden teeth set in it at intervals for the whole length. A horse was hitched at each end, and walking one on each side of a long windrow of hay, they pulled the plank sideways. The long teeth slipped under the hay, and it piled up in front of the plank and was pushed along the ground. When there was enough of a load and it was where the stack was to be, Manly tipped the plank. It went over the top of the hay, which was left in a pile. Several of these piles started the stack. Then as the horses came into it, one went on each side of the stack. The rake went on up. Manly followed it and spilled the hay on top of the stack, and then went down the other end after another load. Barnum was good and always walked along with his end of the plank on the side of the stack. But Skip stopped when he had no driver, so Laura drove Skip the length of the stack and then sat against the sweet hay on the sunny side while Manly would bring up another load with a rake. When the stack was high enough, Manly raked down the sides with his pitchfork and gathered up all the scattered hay around and against it, making all neat and even. Then he topped the stack with a load of hay from the wagon. So the nice fall weather passed. Nights grew cooler, frost came. The haying was finished. Manly had mortgaged the homestead for $800, so now he could buy the coal for winter, and it was stored in the storeroom. The taxes of $60, there were no taxes on the tree claim because they had no title yet, were paid. Interest on the notes given for machinery was paid. There was money for seed in the spring and to live on, they hoped, until next harvest. The hay had helped. Manly had sold 30 tons at $4 a ton, and the $120 was a year's income from crops. Wild geese were late coming from the north, and when they did, seemed in no hurry to go on south. Instead, they fled in the slough and flew from one lake to the other, where the water was nearly covered with them as they swam about. The sky was filled with their V-shaped flocks, and the air ran to their calls. Manly hurried into the house for his gun one day. "A flock of geese is coming over so low, I believe I can get one," he told Laura. Quickly, he went out the door, and forgetting that the old gun kicked, he held it up before his face, sighted, and pulled the trigger. Laura followed him just in time to see him whirl around with his hand to his face. "Oh, did you hit a goose?" she asked. "Yes, but I didn't quite kill it," he answered, as he wiped the blood from his nose. The flock of geese went on unharmed to join their kindred at the lake. It was going to be an open winter. The geese knew there was no hurry to go south. The small field was soon plowed and the hurry of work was over. In November, the snow came and covered the ground, making good sleighing. Manly and Laura, well bundled up and covered with robes, went often for sleigh rides on Sunday afternoons. Because Laura felt so much better outdoors, Manly made a hand sled and a breast collar harness for old Shep. On pleasant days, Laura hitched Shep to the hand sled and let him pull her on it down the hill to the road. Then together they would climb the hill, Shep pulling the sled and Laura walking beside him to take another ride down until she was tired from the walking and the fun. Shep never got tired of it, and at times when the sled tipped against a drift and Laura rolled into the snow, he seemed actually to laugh. And so November passed and December came. The sun was shining on the morning of the 5th of December, but it looked stormy in the north. "Better play outdoors all you can today, for it may be too stormy tomorrow," Manly said. So, soon after breakfast, Laura hitched Shep to the sled and took the day's first ride down the hill. But she stayed out only a little while. "I don't feel like playing," she told Manly when he came up from the barn. "I would rather curl up by the stove." And again, after the dinner work was done, she sat idly by the stove in her little rocking chair, which worried Manly. Along in the afternoon, Manly went to the barn and came back with the horses hitched to the sleigh. "I'm going for your ma," he said. "Keep as quiet as you can until we come." It was snowing hard now as from the window Laura watched him drive down the road with the team trying their best. She thought that the pace would have won them the prize at the 4th of July races. Then she walked the floor or sat by the stove until Manly came back with her ma. "My goodness," Ma exclaimed as she warmed herself by the fire. "You should not be up. I'll get you to bed right away." And Laura answered, I'll have a long time to stay in bed. I'm going to stay up now as long as I can. But soon she made no objections and only vaguely knew when Manly drove away again to fetch a friend of her ma's from town. Mrs. Powers was a friendly, jolly Irish woman. The first Laura knew of her being there was hearing her say, Sure she'll be all right, for it's young she is. 19, you say, the very age of my Mary. But we'd better have the doctor out now, I'm thinking. When Laura could again see and know what went on around her, Ma and Mrs. Powers were standing one on each side of her bed. And wasn't Manly at the foot? No. Manly had gone for the doctor. Then were there 2 Ma's and 2 Mrs. Powerses? They seemed to be all around her. What was that old hymn Pa used to sing? Angel's Bank, coming around me stand. Angel Bank, coming around me stand. Oh, bear me away on your snowy wings to... She was being borne away on a wave of pain. A gust of cold, fresh air brought her back as she saw a tall man drop his snowy overcoat by the door and come toward her in the lamplight. She vaguely felt a cloth touch her face and smelled a keen odor. Then she drifted away into a blessed darkness where there was no pain. When Laura opened her eyes, the lamp was still shining brightly over the room, and Ma was bending over her with the doctor standing beside her, and in the bed by her side was a little warm bundle. See your little daughter, Laura, a beautiful baby, and she weighs just 8 pounds, Ma said. It's a fine girl you are yourself, Mrs. Powers said from where she was sitting by the fire. A fine, brave girl, and baby'll be good because of it. You'll be all right now. So Manly took the doctor and Mrs. Powers home, but Ma stayed, and Laura went to sleep at once with her hand resting gently on little Rose. Rose was such a good baby, so strong and healthy that Ma stayed only a few days. Then Hattie Johnson came. To wash baby this time instead of windows, she said. But soon Hattie went, and the 3, Manly, Laura, and Rose, were left by themselves in the little house atop the low hill with a sweep of the empty prairie all around it. There was not a house near enough for neighbors, but a mile away across the slough a few buildings on the edge of town were in sight. 100 precious dollars had gone for doctor bills and medicine and help through the summer and winter so far, but after all, a rose in December was much rarer than a rose in June and must be paid for accordingly. Christmas was at hand and Rose was a grand present. Then the day before Christmas, Manly hauled a load of hay to town and brought back the most beautiful clock. It stood nearly 2 feet high from a solid walnut base to the carved leaf at its very top. The glass door that covered the face was wreathed with a gilt vine on which 4 gilt birds fluttered, and the pendulum that swung to and from behind them was the color of gold too. The clock has such a pleasant, cheerful voice as it said tick-tock, and when it struck the hour, its tone was clear and sweet. Laura loved it at once. The old round nickel alarm clock could not be depended on to tell the right time, but still it would have answered the need, and Laura said doubtfully, but not you. But Manly told her he had traded the load of hay for it, and it would be a Christmas present for all 3 of them. The hay he had kept for feed was holding out so well that there would be more than enough to take the stock through the rest of the winter, and he couldn't have sold the load of hay for money because they were not shipping anymore. Christmas was a happy time even though it was a stormy day, and they stayed quietly at home. After the Christmas storm, the weather was clear and sunny but cold, 25 and 3 below zero on some days. But one day seemed unusually warm, and Laura had been at home so long she wanted to go for a sleigh ride to see Ma and Pa. Could they take the baby out safely? They were sure they could. Some blankets were put to warming by the stove. Manly drove the cutter close to the door and made a little warm nest of them in the shelter of the dashboard. Rose was wrapped in her own warm blankets and little red cloak and hood, with a thin blue silk handkerchief lightly covering her face and tucked tightly in among the blankets in the cutter. Then away they went, the horses stepping quickly and the sleigh bells singing merrily. Several times, Laura put her hand in among the blankets and touched Rose's face to be sure that she was warm and that there was air beneath the veil. It seemed only a few minutes until they drove up to the old home place and went quickly into the house, where Ma and Pa both scolded them well. "You're crazy," Pa said. "Out with that baby when it is 15 below." And so it was by the thermometer. "She might have smothered," Ma added. "But I watched. She couldn't have," Laura answered. And Rose waggled her fingers and cooed. She was warm and happy and had a good nap. Laura had never thought it might be dangerous to take the baby out, and she was anxious on the way home and glad when they were safely there. It seems there was a good deal to take care of babies. There were no more sleigh rides for some time, and then one day that was really warm, they drove the 4 miles to see their good friends, the Boasts. Mr. and Mrs. Boast lived by themselves on their farm. They had no children and could hardly make fuss enough over Rose. When at last the visit was over and Mr. Boast was standing by the buggy to see them start, he started to speak, then hesitated and finally said in a queer voice, "If you folks will let me take the baby in to Ellie for her to keep, you may take the best horse out of my stable there and lead it home." Manly and Laura were still in astonishment, and Mr. Boast went on, "You folks can have another baby and we can't. We never can." Manly gathered up the reins, and Laura said with a little gasp, "Oh, no, no, drive on, Manly." And they drove away. As they drove away, she hugged Rose tightly, but she was sorry for Mr. Boast as he stood still where they had left him, and for Mrs. Boast waiting in the house, knowing she was sure what Mr. Boast was going to propose to them.